Hi everyone, it's BritSimon. Good morning to you all. I thought I'd record a video which I think is actually going to be a very important video for you to watch and understand. It's with regard to embassy performance. And this is going to be absolutely critical, in fact, fatal for some of you in terms of your DV lottery journey. The embassies have the power to decide how many cases they schedule each month. We have tried many times and in various ways to try and change that behavior, to insist that an embassy behaves in certain ways and increase their performance. But those various ways that we've tried have always failed. And those ways have included lawsuits, Twitter campaigns, direct requests, literally emails to the embassies, all sorts of approaches we've used in order to get their performance to being in the right place. And it's never worked, right? So the Twitter campaigns don't work. I know people get very frustrated and they want to have these Twitter campaigns. They don't work, okay? Nobody at the embassies looks at Twitter and says, oh, a lot of people on Twitter are unhappy, therefore we've got to do more work for DV Lottery. It's never worked, and it won't work. So feel free to do it if you want to, but I'm afraid that isn't a good way of doing it. Lawsuits we've tried, and with the exception of one case that I think there was some significant change in the system because of one of the lawsuits. In general, the lawsuits have never actually caused a judgment that says this lawsuit is this embassy is misbehaving, is not scheduling enough DV lottery cases, and therefore must operate differently. The Department of State themselves have taken the view that they are not in control of local decisions about how to prioritize. And they did at one point try and sort of suggest during COVID times, they tried to suggest what the prioritization should be from a centralized point of view, and they passed that information down to the embassies. And then later they withdrew that advice and said instead that it was up to the embassies to decide what work they do, what they prioritize. And also at that time, they were concerned about the safety of staff, etc. And they said also it was up to the local embassies to decide, anything to do with the safety of their staff and their customers, of course. So basically, embassy performance is what it is. You can't do anything about it, right? So if you're allocated to an embassy, that builds up a hell of a backlog, a big backlog of cases. And particularly if you're a sort of even medium case number, then your chances will be lost if you're in a situation where you get allocated to that embassy and you can't move, and you're in a hopelessly long backlog of cases. Then literally you will lose your chance, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, the tricky point is that when you become current and your case has been processed, you will be allocated to the queue of AV status cases at your embassy, the embassy that is chosen for you based on your address or the one that you selected. Once you're allocated into the AV queue, right, the queue of people in AV status at an embassy, you can't move. And so by that time, it's too late to make a decision to say, I want to move. And you're literally totally tied into that embassy. KCC won't accept any request to unlock a case that is in AV status, okay? Now, why do I mention unlocking? Well, because the most reliable way of changing the embassy you're allocated to is by changing your address to another country. and that's by moving, of course. I'm not suggesting, of course, that you would write that you lived in another country when you actually don't live in another country. I wouldn't suggest that, obviously, of course, I wouldn't. But that essentially is how your embassy is chosen for you. No matter what you ask for, they will look at your address. And if you live in Kenya, you're going to be allocated to the embassy in Kenya. If you live in South Africa, you're going to be allocated to the embassy in South Africa. And only in very rare and quite exceptional cases can you, for example, say, I live in Johannesburg, but I'm going to be traveling to Paris for the next 6 months on work. I haven't moved there yet, but I would appreciate if you would move my case to Paris, right? That would be an exceptional, very rare thing that they would agree to. They would normally say, okay, once you've moved to Paris, let us know by unlocking your DS-260, and we'll change your address, right? And so the KCC will generally refuse requests until you can show that you have actually moved, right? And so it is best not to request an embassy move. It's best to request to unlock your DS-260, make the address change, and then resubmit your form. And after you've done that, a week or 2 weeks later, if you email the KCC and say, my address has changed, as you can see, could you please make sure I'm allocated to that new country in terms of the embassy, then that request will be done every time, right? That's a reliable way of changing your embassy. So don't, for goodness sake, email KCC unless you've got an extraordinarily good excuse or reason. And don't email them and say, I want to change my embassy, because the minute you do that, they know that you're looking to change your embassy, and you're going to give them whatever story you have to give them because you think you need to give them a story in order to get them to change. And they won't change. Once they've said no to you, it's very, very difficult, okay? And they will say no to you if you don't have a good reason. So you're far better off not asking to change your embassy, but actually just unlocking your DS-260. And again, as I've pointed out before, if you still believe that unlocking your DS-260 is bad, it's because you're listening to the wrong people, and you need to stop listening to those people. That is a nonsense point, and it's been proved over and over again that unlocking a DS-260 isn't bad. But I'll tell you what is bad is leaving your DS-260 locked because you don't want to unlock it, and then you get allocated to the AV status at an embassy which has an enormous backlog. And in that situation, because you didn't unlock your DS-260, you are then screwed. You will lose your DV lottery chance because you're allocated to an embassy that's never going to accept your case. Okay? So that's what I think is bad. Okay. So having introduced the topic, why embassy performance is important and why you need to start thinking and strategizing if you're at an embassy that is going to build up a bad queue, a long backlog of cases in AV status. If you're in that situation, it's important that you understand how your embassy is performing, right? Now, all of us from time to time, I'm sure, have been frustrated about things. And in the DV world, there's always frustration about, oh, I don't think my embassy is performing very well, or I'm frustrated because I should have heard by now about my embassy. And sometimes, probably half the time, those frustrations are unfounded, unwarranted frustrations. It's people just being impatient, and there's really no need to worry. But at the time that we're at here, coming up to the end of December, we're starting to talk about March interviews, right? So we're starting to get to the point where you really need to be sort of getting into the busier time of March, April, May interviews. Those are the busier times. And you need to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that you're lined up at a good embassy before you get locked into the AV status at a bad embassy, okay? So in the next couple of weeks, or less than that, just over a week from now, we're going to have the SEAC data from Zarthisius, which will tell us how many visas have been issued for the first 3 months of the year for every embassy, right? We'll know how many visas have been issued. We'll know how many cases were scheduled. We'll be able to see, some of the information about embassy performance, etc. But and when we have that, it's extremely important that you guys and gals pay attention to that data and what it means for your case. But we also can have an early look at the October and November issuances, which we have from the official data. Okay, so let me show you some of what I'm talking about. Excuse me, and we can begin to educate you about that. So there is a web page here. Let me just pull up this. Yeah, let me just show you my screen. There is a web page, the monthly immigrant visa issuance statistics, that has every month is published in terms of the number of issuances per post, right, per embassy, or by foreign state chargeability. In other words, where were you born, right? Now, you can look on Zarthisius's site, and you can have a look at this data. He's got all the data laid out there from a country perspective. He's focused on the country of birth perspective, right? So, for example, he's just added the FY24 November statistics, and you can choose the month in FY24 between October and November, and we can see the total number of visas issued per region, and we can then see per country, like which countries people are from. But this data basically takes all Nepalese, for example, and gives us a number for all the cases from of people from Nepal, no matter where they were. So it's helpful for embassy performance, but not exact for embassy performance, right? Now, where that data comes from is these two files, the issuances by FSE or place of birth and visa class, right? And you can see we've got the October data there and the November data. But what I've done is I've pulled out the October issuances by post and visa class for October and November, and I've put those into a spreadsheet, and I've got that data here. Right now, these particular lists cover all of the visa classes, and you can see by embassy how many visas they issued in each class. Right. I've got that data for November and October. That's the data from the site I just showed you. So it's the official issuance data per post, per embassy. Then I've filtered out just the DV data. So I've got the October and November DV numbers for each embassy, which is important for us to look at, right? And then I've taken a list of all of the embassies and plotted against those embassies those numbers for October and November, so that we can see it side by side. So for Abu Dhabi, for example, UAE, they issued 47 visas in October and then 16 in November, right? This does not mean that this is for people who are chargeable to UAE or Iran or any other specific country. This is about that embassy performance, right? So, and then you can see other countries as they go down the list. We can see other countries here. I've got the whole world plotted out. There's 150 embassies, and I've plotted all of the issuances against those 150 embassies. Now, I can tell you a couple of things straight off the top about this. A couple of sort of broad things. So far, the issuances in DV 2024 are ahead, better than DV 2023 at this same point in time. Okay, which I thought was a very interesting point, because you may have had the impression that they weren't doing very well, but actually they are. They've actually exceeded the number of visas that were issued by this same time in 24 as compared to 23. And 23 was an absolute record year, right? And much better, by the way, than DV 2022. 22 had a slow start and caught up later. 23 had a good start and then went crazy later, went really, really, really well later, right? But it had what we thought was a good start. Well, DV 2024 has had an even better start in the first 2 months of the year, right? There's about 4,000, I think it's about, let's just total these up. Oh, I've totaled them up in this list. That's good. Yeah, there are 2,328 issued in November and 1,866 issued in October. And if we just look at, let's have a look at this data. If we go to Zarthisius's site and we look at 23, let's do this, and we'll do annual, and we'll look at 23 data. Let's have a look at 23 data as a comparison, right? So cumulative visas issued per month in DV 2023 for all regions was 1,356 in October and 1,796 in November, right? So you can see that the first 3 months of the year, which are always the quietest 3 months, there's no doubt about that. But the first couple of months of the year, last year there were 3,152 visas issued after the first 2 months, and this year we're over 4,000. So we've got 1,000 more visas issued in the first 2 months of the year. So that's a really good start. Okay, we'd expect them to see something like to issue something like 2,000 again in December, maybe 2,500 looking at the data. And so that's going to take us to over 6,000 by the time we get into the first 3 months of the year, right? And so, yeah, 4,194. So 1,000. The total between those 2 months was been 4,194. So that's 1,000 more than the performance in the first 2 months of DV 2023. And DV 2023 again was a record-breaking year. Okay, I'll show you how it became a record-breaking year just quickly. It became this red box is what you look at for the monthly performance, and you can see that the monthly performance in the months from January through to let's say May, that was an absolute powerhouse performance for those early months. And these months, later months, for example, in August, they issued 7,800 visas. That's completely like off the charts, unheard of. I'd never heard of a month where they had issued so many, right? So they have the ability to issue 7,800 visas in a single month. And they actually did nearly 7,800 in May as well. So they broke records twice in DV 2023, but that did mean that there was a lot of effort pushed to the back end of the year, and it became somewhat chaotic. So it is much better, and I'm glad to see that they're emphasizing the beginning months of the year to make sure they don't have so much chaos later on. It makes sense, right? So I expect to see steady growth of issuances in January, February, March, April, May. But I would rather not see this absolutely enormous sort of spike and panic mode in these months, in August. And September was low, of course, because they stopped the program early, right? Okay, so, and they stopped the program early because they ran out of visas, right? I mean, they actually exceeded the number of visas they should have issued. Okay, so we can start to see then that they've got a pretty good year start. And now we need to think about how are individual embassies performing. So I've got the list of embassies, and I've included on there also the homeless embassies. So there is an official definition of a homeless embassy or homeless country, where, for example, in this case, Iranians are interviewed at one of three embassies, which is Abu Dhabi, Ankara, and Yerevan, right? And if you're Eritrean, you're supposed to be interviewed in Addis, Ethiopia. If you're Syrian, you can be interviewed in Amman or in Beirut. Okay, these are the standard embassies when you don't live in some other country, a third country, completely disconnected to these countries. So if you live in Sudan and you're a winner, and there are 5,500 Sudanese winners, you're supposed to be interviewed in Cairo, okay, in Egypt. Now, Cairo or Egypt already has 5,500 winners of its own. So there are 11,000 people who should be being interviewed in Cairo, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So, so from my perspective, I want to look at a list of embassies and say how much work should they be doing, and how much work are they doing, and from that I can begin to form what I call a shit list. And I'm sorry for the crass name, but it's been my term for since the last 2 or 3 years. Of embassies that should be performing well because they've got lots of people allocated to that embassy, but they don't perform well. And I've maintained a shit list in DV 2022, 23, and now it seems I've got to develop a shit list in DV 2024 as well, right? So, and embassies that don't want to be on the shit list, that don't want to be on BritSimon's shit list, there's a very easy way to do that, and that's do your damn work, okay? I'm speaking to you, embassies. I'm speaking to you, Accra. So there are a few embassies that probably don't love their place on my shit list, but never mind, they've earned it. Okay, so let's start talking about some of those embassies, and I'm going to go down the list and point out the countries that I think are clearly underperforming at this point, and what you should start to be thinking about, and when we'll have more information. Okay, so first obvious shitlist country is Accra embassy, the country of Ghana, embassy of Accra. They did no issuances in October and 35 in November. We know that they started to take around about 25 or 30 interviews per month in the course of DV 2023. And that's not enough. They need to be doing more than that in order to see all of their people, right? All of the Ghanaians that are hoping for an interview. So they are already building up a backlog. Now, remember, 35 is the number of visa issuances, including derivatives. So that's probably, for Accra, that's probably about 22, 23 cases, something like that. Maybe even 25 cases, because there's a very low derivative rate in Ghana. Okay, so Accra have made the shitlist position again for the 3rd year running, I'm afraid. Next one, also in red. Red is my danger zones, right? So Addis has got, there's about 3,000 Ethiopians, and there's a couple of hundred Eritreans as well. And they've issued 9 and 14 in those 2 months. It's not good enough. And it certainly means there is a backlog growing at that embassy. Okay. So as we go down the list here, a little bit concerned about Oman, but not enough to really be panicking at the moment. Really impressed by Algeria's performance in DV 2022 and DV 23. They issued 250 in October, 49, bit odd that they went down, but 49 in November. But I'm absolutely sure that Algeria is going to meet its capacity again and probably issue 3,800 visas this year. So the embassy performance in Algeria is not a concern. And as you go down the list, there are some other countries here which just, okay, they've got low numbers like Amsterdam, but 0 and 3, but there's not many local applicants. So that's not really a surprise, right? That's why they've got a low number there, but I'm not surprised and I'm not worried about them, right? Next one I'm worried about is Ankara. There are lots of Turkish selectees. They should be doing better than this. They were an underperforming, backlogged embassy in DV 2023, and it looks like that's continuing, right? And they also have to deal with some Iranians as well. So they should be doing better than this. 29 and 26, they should be doing better than that. That means that they issued something like 12 to 15 cases in each month. Really? The whole month? Turkey? The whole embassy of Accra, big embassy, can only do that? That's not good, right? Okay, and as we carry on down the list, I'm going to go down this list slowly, and you have a look at your embassy or your country and figure out whether you're comfortable with the performance. Like Almaty in Kazakhstan, although there's quite a lot of selectees for Kazakhstan, I'm not really worried about that performance yet. It's not so bad. So, that's probably okay. As we go down the list, Romania's okay, that's fine. Iraq is starting to do its own interviews again, and it's a good thing to see, but we'll have to keep an eye on them to see whether they have enough capacity within their restricted capacity. And if you're Iraqi, you're probably better off somewhere else, right? So, you've got to think about that. But they're not quite ready to be added to the shit list yet. Okay. Bishkek is doing pretty well for Kyrgyzstan. Good performance there. So that's good to see. Mumbai, now there are no Indian applicants, but Mumbai tend to pick up some of the Afghanistan overflow. Between Islamabad and Mumbai, they tend to pick up that. So, it's a little bit low to see that, but not too bad. Mostly, Afghanis prefer to go to Islamabad, so I'm a little bit more concerned about that. So yeah, Bombay, Mumbai. It's interesting they've still got BMB as the abbreviation there, but Mumbai, India, in India, probably not too bad, right? Bangkok, that's probably okay, given the number of local applicants there. Beirut clearly hasn't done anything yet. That's a bit strange, shall we say? But it's a little bit early for me to consider them to be a shit list, considering that there's a relatively low number of Lebanese, right? So the question that I have to think about in my head, whether to add them to the shit list or not, is how many selectees there are locally. And if we look at that for Lebanon, let's do that. This one. Let's have a look at feasibility. Yeah, let's have a look at the Lebanon. Where are you? Yeah, 214. So 214 selectees, not a big number, right? With some Syrians as well, it's not a huge number. So the fact that they're off to a slow start is not really a problem. They could overcome that. They could interview all the Lebanese cases, which is probably 110 Lebanese cases. They could probably interview all of those in 1 or 2 months. So the fact that they didn't do anything in October and November is really not a problem. I'm not too concerned. And the Syrians, although they go there, there's only some of them that go there, right? So again, for those reasons, I'm not too concerned about Beirut at the moment. And they, in the past, by the way, in DV 2022, they did very well. They were taking additional cases from other countries. So I think they've got the ability and the willingness to help people. So I'm not worried about Beirut. Okay, as we go down the list. Now, Cairo. Now, Cairo is a special case. I mentioned earlier, there are 5,500 Sudanese and there are 5,500 Egyptians. That's 11,000 people, right? Now, that's a massive number. That's a fifth of the whole African number of selectees. A fifth of the whole of Africa is supposed to be interviewing at the Cairo embassy, right? That's basically what it means. And don't forget, there are lots of other people in Egypt and probably interviewing at Cairo. So that's normally a very important embassy. So Cairo is one I'm worried about because they've only issued 39 and 59, right? We need to see a much better performance from Cairo. So we'll need to keep an eye on that. So it is something to think about if you're going to be allocated to that embassy. Okay. Morocco, not worried about Morocco. They're not quite as fast as Algeria, but they're pretty up there, right? Tajik, Tajik. Well, I'll just say this one, DHB, is doing good. No problems there. Djibouti, because they're dealing with the Yemenis, I'd expect to see higher numbers there. But I really don't know how many Yemenis are able to travel to Djibouti. So, that might not be as bad as it looks, but I've put them on the shit list because I've always been concerned about Yemenis and the difficulties that they've been going through for a number of years now because of the troubles in their country. Okay. Frankfurt, obviously an important embassy because they're handling the Ukrainian overflow because Kiev is closed, of course. Not so bad at the moment, not terrible. And I do think that Frankfurt and Warsaw, which are the two embassies that are for Russian and Ukrainians, those two have shown in the past their willingness to put the effort in if needed. So I'm not really concerned about those two. As we go down the list, Cuba, nice to see Havana actually doing some interviews and issuances there. That must be a great relief for Cubans not having to travel as they used to, and so that's nice to see. That's a good thing to see. Okay, Islamabad, again, that is the normal place for Afghans to go to. Afghans are not actually allocated to any particular embassy as a homeless embassy. So Afghans can actually choose to be interviewed anywhere they can get to. But Pakistan and Islamabad in particular is an easy place for them to get to, relatively speaking. Muslim country and perhaps quite similar in terms of the culture, etc. So easier for an Afghan to go there and be interviewed there, even though there are no local applicants. That's why Islamabad is important. And so their performance then is a little bit slower than I would expect or want to see. But it could also be the difficulties that Afghans have in just traveling, right? Maybe that's an explanation. So we'll keep an eye on them, right? Kathmandu, no problems with Kathmandu, right? If you're from Nepal and you're asking me about embassy performance and you're getting yourself all upset and worked up, you're being silly. Nepal is going to hit its numbers. It's going to interview everyone it needs to interview. There isn't a concern, right? And the fact that they didn't do anything in October and then did 256 is fine. It's fine. It's not a problem. They have had individual months that have been incredible performances. So no need to worry about those. Okay. As we go down the list here, I'm not concerned about any of these embassies. You may see an embassy that you think is important and perhaps you think is backlogged, but consider how many selectees there are for that country and whether that's important for the region or whether they've got other people that interview there. And perhaps let me know if you think I've missed an embassy here which is seriously impactful, not frustrating to you personally because you are impatient. I mean, seriously impactful to a larger number of people. Okay. So go down here. No real concerns. Now, this embassy, Nairobi, was a concern in DV23 and 22. And I'm very pleased to see that they are now sort of issuing decent numbers. They have the Kenyans, of course, Eritreans, Somalians, and South Sudanese, right? So they're handling a lot of cases. They're pretty, not as much as Cairo, of course, but they're a pretty important embassy. And when they don't operate, when they don't work well, added to Cairo not working well and Addis, those three embassies carry a huge number of the African population. And so when those three, and Accra, those four, when Accra, Accra, Addis, Nairobi, and Cairo, when all of those are not performing, that's a big problem for Africa as a whole. So I'm pleased to see Nairobi working at least, even though the other three are not working well enough. Nairobi is important. I'm pleased to see them starting to work well. So these numbers are as good as you can expect at this stage of the game. That's really good news to see them working like that. Okay, carry on down the list. Not concerned about any of these. Not really a problem for any of those. Now, Yerevan, the 3 embassies for Iran are a little bit of a problem. Obviously, the Iran population is split amongst 3 embassies, so that's kind of advantageous for Iranians. The fact that they are dedicated not just to 1 but to 3 embassies, right? But at the same time, we need to see better performance. Now, if Ankara, that's another one. If Ankara is not performing well, then that's that's bad for Europe, but it's also bad for Iranians, right? And so Yerevan is the same, and Abu Dhabi is the other embassy that's important for Iranians, right? So it's not terrible to see these numbers. 3 was a little bit scary, but 117 in Yerevan in November was better. So I've colored them in this purple color on this spreadsheet. I don't consider them to be a shit list at the moment, but we'll keep an eye on them. Same thing for Abu Dhabi. Reasonable numbers there. And if you check the number of Iranians, I think there's 45 Iranians already been issued so far this year in those 2 months. So that's not too bad. Okay, so that's my shit list. So I'm worried about Accra, Addis, Ankara, Cairo, very much so. Djibouti, yeah, important too. Islamabad needs to move their butts. And that's it. That's the only ones that I'm really worried about. Okay. Now that is, funnily enough, I was looking at this the equivalent of the same list in 23, and this was some months ago. I posted here. This is me on the DV 2023 channel, and here's what I thought the shit list would be at this time, which was several months ago. This was in DV 2023. Abu Dhabi, Accra, Addis, Ankara, Cairo, Khartoum at the time, but they're no longer taking cases anyway, and Nairobi, right? Well, Nairobi has improved, and Cairo and these other ones are still on the list, okay? So it's consistently bad from year to year, and I think that's also an important point that we need to consider. Not just bad in one year, but bad in 2 years or 3 years. So the ones that are on the shit list have, they've had time to do better. Let me briefly talk about what those embassies are doing instead of doing DV cases, because I know that. And then lastly, just to wrap up this video, I'll come back to this and we'll talk about what you need to do if you're on one of these embassies, right? And what information we'll get next. Okay, so firstly, let's talk about why are they not working on DV cases. If we look at the October data and the November data, we can look at the individual embassies, right? So let's look at Accra. Now, here's Accra. That's those. Let's make that bigger so you can see that a little bit easier. Yeah. So that's Accra. That's all of the visa classes that Accra have done. They've done, 1 CR1, 14 E2s, and so on down here. And then DV, this in October, they did no DV, right? But in October, they did this number of IR 1, 2, and 5s, right? IR visa classes are immediate relatives. I'll explain that in a minute. That's important. If we look at the same thing for November, we can see, and let me make that bigger as well. We can see that, yes, they did 35 DV cases, but again, they've done over, what's that, nearly 650 of IR cases, right? Not very much in anything else except IR and a few DVs, right? This is Accra. Now, IR is immediate relative. Why is immediate relative having these massive numbers in Accra and very few DV? Well, quite simply, it's this. IR visas are visas for immediate relatives of American citizens, right? So it's an American citizen who marries a spouse and wants to bring the spouse to America. That's an IR1. or a child of an American citizen or citizens is an IR2, 3, or 4. 2 is a natural born biological child. 3 and 4 are both adopted children, right? And then IR5 is parents of American citizens, right? Now, those categories, IR1 through 5, are not limited by number in each year. So, for example, if you are the adult child of an American citizen, for example, there is a limitation on the number of visas that can be issued every year in that class. And so if there are more people waiting for those visas, the waiting time is increased. That's what happens. We see that on the visa bulletin, and it can take years and years and years for people in numerically limited classes to get their visas. But if you're in the IR1 through 5 class, a parent of an American citizen, a spouse of an American citizen, or the child, the minor, under 21-year-old unmarried child of an American citizen, those classes are not numerically limited, and therefore they are the highest priority of visa classes, and they're for American citizens. And America is all about keeping Americans happy, first and foremost, right? So immigrants from other countries take second place from a natural point of view in the mindset of Americans, particularly when it comes to the IR 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 classes, right? So that's why we see these embassies that are on the shit list doing very high numbers of IR numbers. They've got capacity to do the DV lottery cases, but they are instead focusing on what they think is a higher priority, which is keeping Americans happy, getting these numerically not limited visa classes through for those American citizens, right? That's what's going on. That's the same in Accra, in Addis. You can see the same thing, 177 IR1s, and what's that, sort of 300 or so. In Addis, they're not doing, this is Addis as a whole, right? If we have a look at Addis, another one of our shit list, you can see where they're spending their effort, right? This is the November numbers, but they're spending their effort mainly on the IR cases, okay? And so, and as we go down the list, let's have a look at Cairo. Let's just see. I don't think Cairo has a lot of IR business, funnily enough. So Cairo have got some different explanation. Oh, I just passed it. Cairo, here we go. So this is Cairo. So yeah, IR 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, and 5, pretty good number, more than DV, right? But they're also doing some F3s and F4s, etc. They're doing a little bit of other business, but Cairo is a big embassy, important embassy, right? And don't have a huge amount of IR backlog by the looks of it. So they need to really get their act together on DV cases and make sure they're doing that sort of work. Okay. So yeah, immediate relative is probably the biggest reason that this work isn't being done for DV lottery, and that's something that is important to understand. Okay, having said that, right, having given you the numbers, having given you the embassies that I'm most concerned about, because they'll be building up big backlogs, and that is the embassies that are underperforming and have a lot of people allocated to them, right? Those are the ones that I'm most concerned about, and they're clearly they're preferring to do work for the IR categories, right? So what will we find out next? Well, on January 1, we're going to have the SEAC data. In the SEAC data, we will have a few things. We'll know the number of people that were scheduled at each of these embassies, and the number of issuances. But our issuance number will be for the first 3 months as a whole. So let's say, for example, if we look at Abu Dhabi, we might see that they've got, let's say, 100 issuances for the year. And so what I'll do is I'll be able to figure out what was issued in October, what was in November, and what was December. And that will be interesting and important to see the pattern, because the data we get on January 1 doesn't really sort of give us a clue on how they operated on each of those first 3 months. And the monthly capacity is important for us to understand going forward, right? So we'll have the capacity per embassy for the first 3 months and the issuance data for the embassies for the first 3 months, and we'll be able to figure out what is their approximate capacity and project out and say, if they continue with that capacity, what's going to happen, or how much they need to increase the capacity by for the rest of the year. Okay. Now, it is possible that these embassies, for example, like Accra, that is focused on IR, they might actually be working so hard on the IR categories that they handle all of their backlog of IR cases and get those cases done by, let's say by March or April or whatever. Let's hope that they do that. And if that happens, they will then be able to direct their focus to DV cases. So all is not necessarily lost if you're locked into that embassy. But if it were me, if it were my case, I would want the information to say, okay, would I be better off moving? I've got the chance to go move to Nairobi. Would I be better off in Nairobi rather than staying and living in Accra, right? And so if I had the ability, and it's like, I understand it's about financial ability and your ability to move to that country, etc. But would you be better off moving to Nairobi, for example? Then you'll need to make that decision. Okay, but you need to make that decision before you become current. Okay, because if you wait until you're current and your DS-260 is processed, then you're locked into your embassy. So when we get the data on January 1, it's important that we look at this data. Each of you will need to look at this data and make your decisions at that point as to what you want to do. If you're coming up to being current and you don't want to get locked into a badly performing embassy, then you need to think about, are you able to move? Can you go and move to a different country? Can you live in that different country? Do you have family or friends that could help support you in that country? Do you need a visa to go live in that country? Can you give up the job you've got in your home country in order to go move to this new country? And can you survive and be there for the time period to wait for your interview, right? Because you'll have to be there for months, not just weeks. You'll have to have actually physically moved there. Okay, so on January 1, we'll have the data, will bring us up to date, and I'll plot that data into this spreadsheet, and I'll be able to give some updates and confirm or deny my suspicions about which embassies are in backlog status or building up a backlog status. Okay, so that's going to be very important for you to pay attention to. I'm hoping that's all clear. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover. I've given you the data. You can access the data yourself if you just Google the terms. To go see the data, you can go and see the monthly immigrant visa issuance data. You can go have a look at that yourself if you want to. You can see data on Zathisius's brilliant site. You've got all of that data you can go and have a look at. You can see what they're supposed to do in terms of monthly performance. So there's a lot of data out there to help you make your decisions. But as we're looking at this data, I know I'm going to get a bunch of people from, let's say, someone in Madagascar is going to say, "Oh my God, my embassy has only issued one visa in October and then nothing in November. I should move, shouldn't I?" Well, it's like, okay, but did you think about how many Madagascans were selected in the process? I mean, how many can there be, right? And if we have a look at the visa bulletin, we have a look at Madagascar. Where's Madagascar? Oh, where are you? I've lost Madagascar. Where is it? Where is Madagascar? Are there none? Well, that would explain it. I was looking for Venezuela, and of course, I didn't find any Venezuelans. Well, because they're not able to be selected, right? So, hang on. I'm sort of doing this these days where I'm losing the plot, but no, No, not anyway, right? Okay. And in fact, I've got in my spreadsheet. But anyway, you take my point. If you're in Madagascar and you don't have a big local population, or you're in some other embassy and you don't have a big local population, then don't worry that your embassy is underperforming at the moment, because there's just not, there's no question that they can sort of do all of that work, the backlog work that they need to do in a very short period of time, right? So there's just no reason to worry for those things. So please don't inundate me with questions about how about this embassy? How about this embassy? Because if I didn't call your embassy out, unless you've got really good reason to think that your embassy is underperforming and it has a lot of selectees locally, or it's handling a lot of selectees from another country, then really there's no need to worry. Okay, so have a look at the data before you come and get yourself worried about that. Now, hang on a second. Okay, so selectees, yeah, okay, I've got all of that, so I can realign myself. So I didn't show you this number, but this was also, I have this data about how many selectees are selected for each of the regions. I have that list sorted alphabetically at the moment, but I look at it by region as well. Okay, October, yeah, okay, so I've shown you the data. I've shown you the ones you need to be thinking about, and perhaps you need to be worried about. But if it's not one of those embassies, then you probably don't need to be worried. Okay. Okay, I'll call that a day. Thanks for listening along. I hope you found this this video interesting. If you do, please give me a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, shame on you. But go click the subscribe button right now. If you're listening to other YouTube channels, feel free. But if you want accurate information, please do come here for the most accurate information. And be informed, because this is your chance in a lifetime, frankly, for many of you. And it's very important for you to be properly informed, not fed bullshit by other people. You need the accurate information to give yourself the best possible chance. Okay? All right, everybody. Thank you very much for listening in. Sorry it was such a long video, but I hope you found it informative. Okay, bye-bye now.